kind of fear. Even people who said, my parents never hit me. And I'd say, well, what would happen if you talk back? Oh, I didn't want to find out. Well, we now have one going on 2 generations of kids who are not afraid of their parents. I am a believer, and a lot of people agree with me, but many people don't. This isn't a closed issue, that the elimination of real fear as a harsh punishment from child raising was a great step forward. I am a believer that all that ever does is promotes the law and order conscience. The conscience that says, it's the primitive conscience that says, I don't want to do bad things because of what's going to happen to me. If you're going to have a society ultimately that's going to work, you want to have the higher level conscience that says, I don't want to do bad things because of the effect of what I do on others. The old harsh punishment model gets in the way of that. There are a lot of wonderful people who were raised under the old harsh punishment model, but it was despite, not because of. But regardless, this is what we got. But there was a little problem, which is nobody knew, because it was a brand new thing, how do human children who are not afraid of their parents behave? We now know. A scientific fact known to everybody in this room is that if you say to a human child who is not afraid of his or her parents, would you please take that cup into the kitchen? We now know that human children are not afraid of their parents, then say, why? And the parent says, because I am asking you to. We now know that human children are not afraid of their parents, then say, but it's not my glass. And the parent says, take the glass into the kitchen. And the kid says, okay, why doesn't Jennifer have to do it? One obvious point. Parenting today is more difficult than it was in the past. Well, duh, they had a piece of leverage that we don't. Parenting today requires more skill. I would have loved, it never happened, but I would have loved with my own kids to be able to say to them, would you please take the glass into the kitchen, and have them say, yes. Or, yes, sir, as my dad used to say. But at any rate, it turns out that this is not quite the disaster that it seems. It's not the disaster that it seems because the particular fact of child and human psychology that I'm now going to describe, that, as I said, puts this behavior in a kind of different light and also has within it a suggestion of what you can do, not to eliminate the back talk. If you want to eliminate back talk, you have to go back to the old harsh punishment model. But certainly something that can dramatically reduce it. And what that, for that particular fact of child and human psychology, I'm now going to tell a little story. I am a 7-year-old boy, and I am coming home from school. And this is the door to my house, and this is the inside, this is the outside, and here is a wall, and on this wall is a coat hook. And I am now coming home. I open the door, I take off my coat, and here's the coat hook. And my mother, who happens to be home, comes to me and says, Stephen, how many times do I have to tell you to hang up your coat? And the kid says, I don't know, a lot, I don't know. And then he hangs up his coat. Next day, same kid comes home from school, opens the door, this is what they all do, comes in. But on this particular day, his mother, who had just yelled at him the day before, is standing right here, and he comes in the house, he looks her in the eye, and again, here's the coat hook, and he says, hi, Mom, how many times will she have to tell him to hang up his coat before he learns? Answer, if he's in 2nd grade, what they graduate high school 12th grade, so what's that, 12 minus 2 is 10 times 200. Is that actually true, that even both boys and girls, end of high school, come home from school, drop the coat on the floor? If you haven't had kids who graduated high school yet, the answer is yes, that's what they do, even last day of high school. Point of the story of the second half, which is going back to 7-year-old boy, he goes to school. And at his school, he has a cubby. And in his cubby is a coat hook. And every day, without anybody saying anything to him, he neatly hangs his coat in his cubby. Not all 2nd graders do that, but many do who just as reliably never hang up their coat at home. I use this because it is a simple example of a phenomenon which is true of kids, is true of us, is true of teenagers, which is we all have two separate modes of operating. One of them, a kind of at-home, I just want to relax, unwind, be fed now version of us. I talk about it as the baby self. And really, it has no patience. It's the mode of nurturing. The other thing about baby self, which I should mention, and this is true of all baby selves, our kids, our baby selves, is that baby selves will tolerate zero stress. And the reason I mention that is that it's the explanation for, as I'll be talking about, mainly who you get, the version of your kids who you get, it's a baby self version, that the phenomenon whereby you say to a child, would you please move this over there? And they will argue for half an hour. And you say, excuse me, but the amount of energy that you used in the arguing, how difficult would it have been to do that? Well, the point is that for a baby self, anything that it does not feel like doing is more than what it will do. All baby selves are the same. They don't vary, they don't change from person to person, they don't change over time. But simultaneous is this other side to us that will go out into the world. I talk about it as the mature self. Will go out into the world, will work, will delay gratification to work towards a goal, will tolerate stress, has patience. It's a whole other higher level of functioning. And these two operate in the course of the day very much like a shifting of gears. And you can actually feel it. For example, me, let's say on a particular work day, I had to deal with a number of fairly difficult clients, but at all times, in my mature self mode, I was patient and professional and mature, but I am now coming home after my really rather stressful day, during which time, however, I have been patient and mature and professional, and I am now coming home, and even as I get in the door, it's like my body essences flow away, and I stagger to the couch, where if I am lucky, the channel changer is within arm's length. Because if it's not, I may need assistance. And couples know about this, because you can have one person who's been home the whole day and hasn't talked to an adult human the whole time, but you have this other person coming home who's maybe talked to too many adult humans, but the one who's home wants to tell the one who's coming home about their day, but there's a little problem because the one who's coming home is now shifting from his or her mature self mode into their baby self mode. And in case you didn't know it, listening requires patience, and baby selves have none. And what a lot of couples learn to do is to allow the person coming home to, in effect, have a certain amount of baby self unwinding time. Baby selves are good. It is only in the baby self mode that our kids get the deep nurturing that we all need. Baby selves, I picture it very much like a boxer between rounds. You go out into the world, deal with the world out there, come back, come in the corner, collapse, get re-nurtured, and then you go out again. Without it, stress would be too high. And I can remember quite seriously when my kids were little that I loved them a lot, but there was a special time that I loved them the most, which was when they were asleep, because they were so cute. And no, seriously, because I can remember that, end of the day, I'm dealing with them with what little maturity I have left, and finally they are in bed. And this is the part that you will recognize, which is, this is the time that you can do what you feel like doing. It is our baby self time to do what we want to do. And we're very possessive of that time because it's very important to us, which is why when they're little, it's such an intrusion when Can Grandma Edith, who died, see me in my room? No, go to bed. But I can hear her breathing. Go to bed. And you can feel it's like, I really don't want this now. This is the time I'm supposed to be getting stuff. At any rate, baby selves are good. It's how we get nurtured, how our kids get nurtured. Our kids, being younger, we want them to be able to have more baby self. They need more baby self time. But now, let me ask the first question about baby self, mature self, which is, if it is true, as I am saying, that we want a certain amount of place for our kids to have a place for their baby self, and baby selves are wonderful, cute, funny, loving, but, as I'm going to be talking about a lot from now on, when baby selves are not getting their way, they can be rather less than cute. But think about it. Which would you rather have if you had a choice? That if there has to be a place where the baby self side of your kids come out, which sometimes can be pretty unpleasant, wouldn't you rather that that be at home and with you rather than out in the world? It turns out you do not have a choice. A psychological fact, again known to everybody in this room, is that just the physical presence of a parent brings out the baby self in a child. Classic story, kid is over at a friend's house, parent comes to pick him up. Mom, can we go to McDonald's? No, I'm sorry, sweetheart, we're not going to have time. But you said we'd go to McDonald's. I didn't say. Yes, you did. You said it. I didn't say. Yes, you did. You promised. You do this all the time, every time. And the other parent says, I don't understand. He was so well behaved until you showed up. And then they both conclude, incorrectly, oh, he must be tired. Wrong. If the parent come an hour later, hour earlier, exact same thing would happen. Just the physical presence of parent brings out the baby self in the child. But now let me ask what really is the most important question about baby self and mature self, which is, which of these two, the baby self, which for the baby self version, which for the most part is what you get to see, or the mature self, which mainly you get to hear about, which of these two is the better indicator of who a child really is, more importantly, who they're going to be when they grow up? And let me tell a quick story. Teenage girl. Not all teenage girls are like this, but some are. This particular 15-year-old girl, really unpleasant with her parents. Always gives them a hard time. When they ask her to do anything, always has kind of attitude, very self-centered. Parents go away for a weekend. Girl goes to stay at the home of a friend. Parents come back. 2 weeks later, the mother of the girl runs into the mother of the friend. And the mother of the friend says, and this is really what happens, when she was at their house, she was really quite well behaved. And the mother of the friend says, you must be so proud of your Elizabeth. And the mother of the girl says, Elizabeth, whom? And then they establish talking to the same girl. But this is really what happens when we go to other people's houses. I want, like visiting grandparents, something like that, although I want to correct something that I said, which is, I said that it's parent that brings out the baby self in a child. That's not strictly true. Who brings out the baby self in a child is anybody who's in a regular, day-to-day, nurturing child care role. So if you have grandparents in Minnesota who they see once a year, they're going to tend to get the mature self. If their grandparents involved in a lot of day-to-day child care, they tend to get the baby self. The real reason I mention this is that there is a nasty implication, which is, if you have a two-parent family and both parents are involved in a lot of day-to-day child care, both will get the baby self. But, as often happens, you may have one parent who's involved in a lot of day-to-day child care and one who is not. And consequently, what you can get is one parent getting baby self, one getting mature self, meaning you can have both parents doing exactly the same thing and getting different results. Mother and teenage daughter are again involved in a loud, bickering argument. Meanwhile, in the other room, the father, disturbed again by his daughter and wife, disgustedly puts down his newspaper, gets up, goes into the room where his daughter and wife are, and turns to his daughter and says, "Clarissa, would you please stop it?" Whereupon she does. And then the father turns to his wife and says quite literally what has probably caused at least a few divorces, "Caroline, you just aren't tough enough with the kids." And she says, "I'll show you what's tough." But my point being, you could have two parents, one getting baby self, one getting mature self, meaning that they're actually getting different behavior from the kids. Going back to the girl who was staying at the home with a friend, the mother of the friend says that when the teenage girl was at their house, as I said, is really what they do, she was very polite. She offered to help, which they do at other people's houses. And the thing that kills parents of teenagers, she's such an interesting girl. And they describe how at one of the meals she talked really very intelligently about the continuing disruption in Iraq is conceivably going to have a serious effect on oil distribution and prices in the U.S. And anyway, the mother goes home, tells her daughter the story, and then says, "Why? Why can't you be that way with us? We're the ones who love you. We're the ones that anybody deserves it." And to which the girl says, "Because you're mean," which is to say, we're getting the baby self version. Which of these two is the better indicator of who a child really is, who they're going to become when they grow up? Answer: absolutely the mature self version. And there's a very strong proof of this, which is that's what happens, which is that by the end of high school, if not before, they start, if they haven't already, becoming nice to you, and they go out into the world and they become perfectly good citizens. And this happens not because parents finally approaching the finish line figured out how to shape up their kids. It happens because they move into the next major developmental stage, which is young adulthood. And it can seem like a miracle. And no, it does not happen because on the last day of his son's adolescence, the father figured out the lecture that worked. "Mister, you just better listen to me. If you think for 1 minute that you can go out in the world and behave like you do towards me and your mother, well, think again, Buster, because you will never be able to hold a job, you will never be able to get a wife, you'll think about that." And the kid says to his father, "Gosh, Dad, I don't know why you didn't explain that to me before. It makes total sense. Gosh, I'll change." No, of course, never happens. But the important point is that if it is true that the mature self behavior is the much better indicator of what's going to happen, what does that say about the sometimes really pretty obnoxious baby self behavior that you can get? Well, one, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing anything wrong. Two, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong with your kid. Mainly, what it is unpleasant. Fortunately, as I said, there's something that you can do that can dramatically reduce, not eliminate, but can dramatically reduce the backtalk and unpleasant behavior. And what that is goes back to the baby self. And it is a third characteristic of the baby self. All baby selves are kids, ours. I said baby cells want to be fed now, they'll tolerate no stress. Third characteristic of all baby selves is that when baby selves are not getting their way, they will do anything, say anything to change that. Baby selves have no conscience. But failing to get their way, baby selves will go on and on forever. And I mean forever. Girl comes to her father. "Dad, can I go over to Stephanie's? We have this history project we're working on, and I need to go over to her house and work on it with her. But I want you to listen how the father talks to his daughter. Gosh, sweetheart, you've been sick, you were out last night, and it is a school night, so I'm sorry, honey, but no." Well, this father has always been kind, considerate, reasonable with his daughter, and we would assume that raising her that way, she's going to be reasonable too, modeling the behavior, so we'd assume she'll probably say something like, "You're right, Dad, I can still feel some of the congestion." Um, no problem. No problem. Look, we can do it over the internet, but thanks for listening. Um, no, that's not exactly what happens. What happens is that she says, you understand, I have to go over to Stephanie's. You don't have to go over to Stephanie's. Yes, I do. I have to go over to Stephanie's. Yes, I do. At any rate, what the father then does, they go on for a little while, and then the father does what I am saying is the exact right thing to say. He says to his daughter, no, I'm sorry, and I do not want to hear any more about it. And then he does what I am saying is exactly the correct thing to do. He turns and he walks away. But if he has a typical teenage daughter, one, he is going to hear more about it. Two, she will follow. And three, should he go into a room, close and lock the door, he's going to stand there, face pressed against the door. But Dad, you didn't give me a good reason. Dad, Dad. And at that moment, we appear and we say, excuse me, can we ask you two questions? What? Do you think your father's going to change his mind? No, he's an idiot. Well then, if he's not going to change his mind, how come you're standing here in this ridiculous position with your face pressed against the door, yelling at him? To which, if she's honest, she'll say, I don't know. Because what's going on, and this is my whole point, and this is the part that you'll recognize, is that that moment, she is fully in the clutches of her baby self. And the way baby selves work is that when they are not getting their way, they cannot let go. They cannot move on. What baby selves hate more than anything else in the world is to separate. And you will recognize this in adult arguments, where the voice, especially arguments with people who we're close to, where our baby selves tend to come out more. That the voice of the baby self inside of us, who are not getting its way, cannot let go, cannot move on, sounds like, I have to get her to see my way. I have to get her to understand. We have to get some resolution to this. We can't just leave it hanging. And what can happen is if both baby selves are too strong, where one or the other should have separated and they don't, the arguments can end up going to serious bad places, which leads to, so what do? Answer. When you are going against the wants of your children, say what you have to say, do what you have to do, and then end, because they will not. What this translates into is decide fast, stand firm, and once you've decided, disengage as fast as you can. The first one, decide fast, that's pretty obvious, but what it really means is a little trickier, because we want to listen to our teenage kids. We want them to feel that they have a voice, meaning that you want to listen to them, and it's excellent if sometimes you change your mind. But in reality, talking about real human teenagers, there gets to be a fairly early point where you want to end it, because it just turns into case pleading. At what point should you end the discussion about a decision? Answer as soon as you start to feel your blood pressure going up. And seriously, because you can recognize when it starts getting into the case pleading. Because one of the facts is that if you're not changing your mind, if your aim is to get your child to understand how many people ever have had the experience of making an unpopular decision with a teenager, trying to explain it to them, and then at the end of half an hour have the teenager say, I can see where you're coming from. I don't like it. I have to admit it. As you say to me, you don't always get everything that you want. As I say, I don't like it, but I'll have to accept it. Doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. Meaning, and later on you want to change your mind, you can, but decide fast. Stand firm, very important. The fact is that the single biggest day-to-day mistake that parents can make is allowing themselves to be bullied into changing their mind. Meaning, that you really have to, if there is something that you want to take a stand on, you have to be willing to see it through to the end. Meaning you have to pick and choose your battles, which has two meanings, two implications to it. One, you can't be battling over everything. So you have to decide what are the things that I care about, what are the things that I really care about. And the other is that if you're not really feeling up to seeing a particular battle through to its end, don't do it. That you have to decide to pick your times and places in the battles and then see them to the end. Because, for example, with a girl wanting to go to a friend's house, she keeps at her father and at her father, and finally he says, fine, you go to Stephanie's house, here, take the car keys, drive yourself. But I'm only 14 and I don't know how to drive. Well, you should have done that before, shouldn't you? But obviously, if they get to wear you down, they learn that if I've argued a lot with my parents, they haven't changed their mind, it's just a sign that I haven't argued enough, and they'll keep going. At any rate, the first two are fairly obvious, decide fast, stand firm. It is the third which really goes against what most of us instinctively feel, which is that when you have truly decided you want to disengage as fast as you can. Because the truth is that once you have truly decided, anything further that you say, anything, only pours fuel on the fire. Because baby selves not only will not let go, but they provoke. They custom tailor what they have learned will push your particular buttons to get into one of these escalating baby self arguments. And now let me tell you the classic baby self story, which is mother and teenage daughter get in an argument, girl wants a new pair of boots, mother says no, they argue for a little, and then the mother says no, and that's it. And the girl has learned from previous experience that when a mother uses that particular tone of voice, anything further that she, the girl, says to her mother is not going to get her mother to change her mind and is not going to pull her mother into one of these endless escalating baby self arguments. So I want you to watch what happens. The mother says to her daughter, no, and that's it. And the girl turns to go. Well, if you have ever gone against the wants of your teenage child and they turn to go, you have done excellent. You have been a firm, strong parent, because as I said, what baby selves hate more than anything else in the world is to separate. So if they actually turn to go, you've won and you've really done excellent. But baby selves die hard. So the girl, in one last, even as she has turned to go, in one last desperate attempt to rehook her mother, mumbles under her breath, bitch. Whereupon, I'm not saying the mother did the wrong thing, but you have to understand what's going on. The real rule is that if there's something that you feel needs to be addressed, the best thing to do, the most effective thing to do, is to wait until later, in a neutral time, and then you go and you say, I heard what you said, I do not want you talking to me that way ever. But I'm not saying the mother, in this case, did the wrong thing, but you have to understand what's going on, because in this particular case, the mother said, what did you say? And the girl, and this is my whole point, the girl made a full 180-degree turn back. She said nothing, but the baby self inside of her said yes. And the mother said, I heard what you said, I do not want you talking to me that way ever. Fine, but now she's re-engaged the girl's baby self. So what she is going to get is, I can talk to you any way I want, this is a free country. At that point, the mother has to disengage because the girl's baby self has her. No, the mother may not say no. As long as you live in this house, under this roof, you will do and talk. This was absolutely not, because they have an answer for everything. The girl says, fine. Trish's mother said that I can live in their house. I'm going to tell her. Could you give me $50 for groceries for the first 2 weeks? I mean, they will always have something more to say. My point, and I do not back down from it, is that if what you want is the least possible fussing and backtalk from your child, both at the time and overall, there is nothing that comes close to being as effective as what I am describing, which is disengaging as quickly as you can. A lot of people understandably are not comfortable with this because they feel if I'm not responding, don't they feel that they are getting away with it? But the answer is absolutely not, and the proof of it is that all you have to do is do it, and you will see that they hate it. They will say, you're not listening to me, you have to listen to me, you're not listening to me. And that's exactly right, because what you're saying is, in effect, that this issue is over. And if you want to be involved with any involvement with parent, I will return, but only when you return to the land of the reasonable. And it really has this. And the point is that when you do it, it feels much more adult than anything else that you do. It's an easy thing to start doing because it rewards itself because it really works. And much better than, don't you dare talk to me that way, I'll talk. Yes, I will. No, you won't. Yes, I will. No, you won't. Then you start getting the threats and the punishment and all that kind of stuff. The reason that I'm so adamant about it is that it's what I did, and it absolutely worked. Except that sometimes my kids would come at me in newly creative and maddening ways, and I would totally lose it. And even as I was screaming at them, a voice in my head would say, gosh, this really isn't supposed to be the way that I'm supposed to handle it. It's too bad I'm out of control. But that can be useful because when you do it wrong, you really see that it doesn't work when you do it right. So anyway, what I'm talking about obviously applies with younger kids, it applies with teenagers, and obviously to some extent it applies with adults. But teenagers are different, and adolescence is a very real phenomenon. It's a useful concept because what it is the coming together of a number of major developmental changes, all within a relatively short period of time, which includes, one, they get new bodies, not just bigger, but they develop all of the secondary sex characteristics, so they take on this much more adult look. And if there's a kid who you haven't seen for a little while and they've gone through their growth spurt, you know the phenomenon of seeing is, who is this adult person? And the best example of this is any photograph of a co-ed 8th grade class, which is, because you will see a picture of a lot of adult women with a bunch of little boys. Yeah. One time, this is a true story, I was leaving a middle school in the area where I work, and it was around lunchtime, and I happened to look in the cafeteria, and I said to myself, oh, that's really interesting, they have the female faculty eating with the 8th grade boys. Very awesome. These are 8th grade girls. Anyway. Obviously, that's a big change. Second change is a cognitive one. They don't just get smarter, they now can understand things in conceptual, abstract ways that their brains actually couldn't before. This has an implication for school curriculum, but it also plays out in day-to-day behavior, because what happens is that they start seeing the world through much more adult eyes. They understand relationships. They'll make a comment about something about a friend or something about a TV show. You realize that there's this whole much more adult kind of perception going on, and it's a cognitive thing. Third change, obviously a huge one, they develop sexuality. Not just the ability to reproduce, but they have sexual feelings. The world becomes sexualized. It's like a whole new dimension has been added to their life, and their life basically because of that changed forever. Fourth change. And it is this fourth change, which is a purely psychological one, that more than any other determines why teenagers act as they do, and especially why they act as they do with parents. And what that change is that as purely psychological, as part of normal psychological development, comes into the head of the teenager, that it is no longer acceptable for them to experience themselves as a dependent little kid. They have to see themselves as an independent, adult-like being. Well, this makes sense, because not too many years they have to go out into the world, be on their own if they feel like a dependent little kid. That doesn't work so good. But at any rate, this is what happens. But there is a little problem. And the problem is that up until that time, there is this person or persons to whom they have very strong love, attachment, dependency feelings, namely their parents. But now, those love, attachment, dependency feelings make them feel like a little kid. By the end of adolescence, this isn't so much of a problem, because what goes on during adolescence is that there is a lot of emotional independence that they work towards. But especially early in adolescence, the love, attachment, dependency feelings are still very strong, but now they're no longer acceptable. And what you get is the classic situation of adolescence, which I will now describe. I am a 14, 15-year-old boy, and I am sitting on a couch in a room by myself, watching television, and I am very relaxed. And now, coming into the room, saying nothing, is my mother. And immediately, I'm not relaxed, and I would like it if she would leave, which if she does leave, I'll immediately go back to being relaxed. And I'm not doing this on purpose. This is not a conscious thing, and this applies both with guys and girls. We can watch through a one-way mirror. We'd see parent, they're there, they're relaxed, parent comes in, they're all nervous and twitchy, parent leaves, they go back to being relaxed. What's happening is that the parent, just by coming into the room, brings out in the child the love, attachment, dependency feelings. But now, those love, attachment, dependency feelings are unacceptable, and it creates an actual feelable conflict, a feelable tension that goes on with the child. And in this particular case, the mother does a terrible thing. She speaks. She says her child's name, James. And he says, "What?" And she says, "Don't talk to me in that tone of voice." And he says, "What tone of voice?" And they kind of go on from there. My only point being that if I am the kid and I'm sitting here in the room having a nice time, I've actually already done my homework, this is my unwinding, nice baby self-time that I'm supposed to have, and I'm having a nice time, but now totally ruining my nice time, coming into the room, is my mother. And she's bringing out, obviously not aware to me, these unacceptable love, attachment, dependency feelings. But not only is she now come in the room, but she is staying in the room. And not only is she staying in the room, but she is speaking to me. In those kind of situations, it is very difficult to talk in this kind of tone of voice. But now I'm going to turn it into a horror story. Because on this particular day, the mother decides that she is going to have some quality mother and son time. And so the mother goes and sits down next to her beloved son, and she puts her arm around him. And the poor kid is so uncomfortable that he gets up and he leaves. And the mother is devastated. She's heartbroken. She was just reaching out to her beloved son, and she feels very rejected, but she was. One point about having a teenager is that with some of them, not all, it can be a real loss for parents, because up until the teenage years, they can be very nurturing of us. There are a lot of teenagers, and I definitely was one of them, who can't be that much fun for parents. And they come back, and they're nice, and they're friendly, but later, but they're never quite the same huggy pumpkins that they were before. But if there is one point that I would make about adolescence, it is as follows, which is, think about what would have happened had the mother come into the room and sat down next to her beloved son and put her arm around him when he was 9 or 10. At 9 or 10, he might well have put his head on her shoulder. And let's say, as usually is the case, that between 9 and 10 and 14 and 15, the mother had done nothing wrong. She was a nice mother. She hadn't made any big mistakes. What happened to turn this child from a loving, affectionate little kid into one who literally could not stand being in the same room as his mother? Answer: the dawning of adolescence, which is to say that in some form, the vast majority of teenagers develop a temporary allergy to their parents. And it's true, just the physical presence of a parent, teenagers find very aggravating. Everything about it is very aggravating. Dad, do you have to breathe that way? And the poor father, who has never been self-conscious about his breathing, is for the rest of his life. A true story is that when my son Nick was in high school, he used to take a bus. High school, it was maybe the bus stop was maybe a 5-10 minute walk from our house. But on some days, if the weather was bad, he was running late, I'd give him a lift. And the bus stop was around a bend in the road, and he would always have me leave him off on the near side of the bend because he didn't want the other kids to see that he had a parent. But one day, it's a totally true story, I said to him, Nick, you know, the other kids have parents too, to which he said to me, but not like you. Which is to say they're basically mortified. Of course, family outings tend to end, other than if you're taking a girl-child shopping, but should you be out in a mall with your daughter and friends come, unaccompanied by parents, friends of hers, and I've actually heard this more than once. One was an instance where the girl said to her mother, pretend you don't know me. Another, the girl actually hid because she didn't want the other kids to see her with her mother because it made her feel too much like a little kid. And as I said, it can be a loss. You know, they can be very nurturing. As a kid comes home from school, little kid comes from school and says, Mom, do you remember my leaf project? Well, it blew away, so I had to borrow leaves from Jimmy Wilson, but I really only rested a couple, and really, they weren't very good leaves. Same exact kid coming home from school, in high school, mother's sitting over there, he doesn't even look at her. She says, hello? He says, hello. She says, come back here. What? I want you to tell me about your dad. I had lunch, okay? You know, when he's out of it. A quick point is that there is a distinct gender difference in the way that girls and guys deal with the basic problem of adolescence, which is, what do I do about the unacceptable love, attachment, dependency feelings that I have towards my parents? Not all boys do it the way I'm described, not all girls do, you have to reverse it, it's normal, but you will recognize these two distinct differences, which is, typical teenage boy turns 14, goes into his room, closes the door, turns on the stereo and the computer, and comes out for supper in high school graduation. Which is to say, teenage boys typically resolve the problem of what do I do about my parents, which is that they absent themselves as much as possible, that they become very private. It can feel very much like a wall that's coming down. I was one of those. I was a chatty little kid, and literally during my high school years, I had one word that I said to my parents. That word was fine. That was what I was saying, everything that, if you think I'm going to tell you about anything at all that is going on with me. And then I got back to being chatty, but there was that. As I said, it really can feel very much like a wall coming down. And teenage boys have a way, even when they are with you, of being absent, which is to say the famous teenage boy way of speaking, which is, and the parents said, golly, we didn't notice this before, but you think maybe we should consult a speech pathologist. And they decide, well, you know, maybe not, because he is, after all, president of the debate team in school, which is a hint that maybe there's something else going on. This even happens with the kids who are kind of confronted, the boys, but in teenage years, boys tend to avoid, the ones with, or for the most part, boys tend to avoid confrontations. And one of the main reasons that they tend to is that they cannot handle them. In one particular way, teenage girls are definitely superior to teenage boys, which is to say, the teenage boys get this mad, and past this point, it becomes physical. Typical teenage boys' room will have a hole that's been punched in the wall, or there's a door that's been a screen door ripped off the hinges following an argument, where the kid stormed out of the house swearing, where it was over nothing, but the argument escalated too much and the kid got too mad. Girls, superior to teenage boys, for the most part, can even get this mad, and it stays verbal. Girls can say a lot of pretty terrible things, but it doesn't get to the level that it does with boys quite as quickly. So that what teenage boys tend to do is they avoid confrontations, but you're still dealing with their baby self. So you have the situation that all teenage boys seem to learn, which is, I say to my son, Kevin, would you please take out the trash? To which teenage boys, they learn to say yes. And then they disappear. And I happen to be in the kitchen, and Kevin knows what's going to happen, but his hunger gets the best of him, so he comes down to the kitchen. And I say to him, Kevin, I asked you to take out the trash. Will you please take out the trash? To which, of course, he says, I will later. And then he disappears, but this time I block his way, and I say, Kevin, I want you to take out the trash now. And then you get the baby sound, you know, why do I always have to do the hard job? Let me tell quickly what really is an important story, which is that it can seem at any point with your teenage child or children, why am I doing anything because none of it's getting any good results? In fact, what's more important often is not so much compliance. Compliance varies with the temperament of your child, but that you keep demands and expectations in place. And let me tell a particular story, which is a true story. It was my son Nick's job, starting from maybe he was like 8 or something like that. It was supposed to be his job that every Wednesday, when he would come home from school, he was supposed to bring in from the curb the 2 empty plastic trash cans. I would bring them out, the full cans, Wednesday mornings on my way to work. And what would happen would be that when I would come home on Wednesdays, without fail, the trash cans were still there. And I would call to Nick, and he would bring, sometimes I'd bring them myself, or I'd call to him and he would bring them in. But this went on literally for years. And then one day, it was either 14 or 15, it's a totally true story, I came home from work, and the trash cans weren't there. And I assumed, as anybody would in that circumstance, oh my God, somebody stole our trash cans. And I happened to arrive, and there were the trash cans, and I called to Nick. As I said, I told you the story. I said, Nick, what's with the trash cans? And he looked at me like I was totally idiot, and he said, I brought them in. And I said, Nick, you brought in the trash cans? I mean, this is the first time in his life. And again, you know, looking like I told him, he said, yeah, it's my job. More or less, from then on, Nick brought in the trash cans. And what I make of that, and I really think this is correct, is that what happened was that he matured. He matured to the point that he didn't have to, when he came home from school, immediately shift into his baby self mode, run inside, get something to eat, and turn on the TV. He matured to the point that he could stay in his mature self mode for the extra 30 seconds that it takes to bring in these empty plastic, not the heavier metal kind, the distance, you know, halfway from here to those doors. Anyway, teenage girls. Unbeknownst to me, it's the first day of my daughter's adolescence, and I'm setting up for supper in the kitchen. And usually, she comes in to help set up for supper, like she has over the 6 years. But on this day, unbeknownst to me, first day of her adolescence, she doesn't come in. I call out to her and I say, Sarah, honey, would you help me set up for supper? And she says, why? And I say, what? And she says, why? Why did you ask me? You never asked Keith. Which is completely true, because why would I possibly want to ask him? Because it makes it so much more difficult, but I know I should take advantage of it this way. But at any rate, what happens is that for the next 2, 3, 4 years, everything that I say to my teenage daughter, she either screams at or disagrees with. Which is to say, teenage girls' way of dealing with the problem of what do I do about the unacceptable love, attachment, dependency feelings that I have towards my parents, is that they declare their independence moment by moment in your face. And it works because I just spent half an hour screaming at my mother, and consequently I'm feeling much more independent, so we can be close for a while. He said, what was it like to be in high school? And I said, where is this coming from? It's so wonderful. Hope it doesn't end, which of course it does, and the mother said, you're doing homework. And but at any rate, there is a paradox that I should mention, which is teenage girls' way can both be more of a surprise and more stressful for parents because it's much more in your face. Yet, teenage girls do a better job with parents during their teenage years in terms of using them for emotional support. They're in much more emotional contact with parents. If a teenage girl has a problem, usually you will, not always, but usually you will know about it. Teenage boys, if they have a problem, who they get to go to typically is nobody. Teenage boys do not go to their friend and say, Brian, I haven't been feeling that confident about myself lately. I'm acting. Just kidding. Which is to say, if teenage boys have a problem, maybe they can work it out on their own and maybe they can't. But this then leads to a question, which is, if there is this thing the teenagers seem to radiate towards parents, which is pushing you away, and you can almost feel it, how much should you respect that? And my answer is some, but not completely. For example, I'm a believer in giving teenagers hugs. They hate it, but at the same time, they like it very much because it says to them, my parent still loves me. That for some reason, no matter what I'm like, they're still there for me, their attachment, their love for me, and that's very reassuring for teenagers. And it really is all part of the stance that I'm going to try and describe that is really useful for cutting through a lot of the teenage grimness that can go on. And what it is a joke. And I'm now going to try and describe the joke. Okay? Which is, I come to my son's room and I knock on the door. Can I come in? No. Well, as you know, it's Tuesday night and it's time for a weekly father and son chat. So I'm coming in anyway. Oh my God. Well, let me think. What do I want to talk about today? What do I want to talk about? Oh, I know. I went to that restaurant. Remember I told you about the restaurant I went to last week where they had the cream of broccoli soup? Oh, I can't believe this. Well, I went back and I had the cream of broccoli soup, and it really wasn't any good. I don't know, maybe they changed cooks or something. I can't believe this is happening. But it is, as I said, part of a joke that's a very good and useful joke with teenagers, and it goes like this, which is, this is understood, it's not so much stated. I know that you can't stand me, but I also know that it is a temporary allergy to me as part of a normal developmental process over which you have little awareness and no control. I know that it is temporary, and I know that it's not personal. Yes, it is personal. It's you. No, not only is it not personal, but I love you so much, and I'm so out of it that I really like our being together. Aren't we having a good time? But in truth, this is really useful, and kids really like it. Obviously, when I'm setting a limit or going against what they want, it's not appropriate. But when they're coming with their sort of normal day-to-day surliness, rather than, you know what I should do? I should videotape you for a day. You know what you get to see? You get to see what an unpleasant person you are to have in the house. And then maybe that would show you what you look. No, not that kind of thing, which is really coming back in response to the same thing they're doing, but really being more upbeat and cutting through it. And kids, as I said, it can cut through both in the moment and overall, because it says to kids, I know that my parents love me, and I know that I'm really pretty obnoxious sometimes, but it's nice to know that at least sometimes they are able to rise above it, which is really what it is. And, if a mother comes to her son, this should never happen. Son, I just would like to know what it is about me that you hate so much. Because I just want to know, because I will change. But it's the mother not understanding what really is going on. What I want to do at this point is talk about one more thing, and then I'm going to stop and open for any kind of questions or comments that people might have, but I do want to talk a little about controls with teenagers, which is, when they get to be teenagers, obviously they're now going out into the world, they're being exposed to all this stuff that we worry about, sex, drugs, drinking. What do? Answer, you supervise as best as you can, trying to know where they are, make sure they're in supervised situations, keeping track of them. Cell phones actually have made a bit of a difference in terms of just actual contact and parents reaching up. But still, as you know, there are going to be opportunities in the life of your teenager where they are going to be exposed to all these things that we worry about. What do? Answer, your teenage child has a problem. And the problem is that when they are out there, your voice is in their head. The nature of the teenage conscience is the voice of the parent. So when they're out there with these decisions, your voice is actually there and it has a very real influence on them. Does it absolutely control what they do? No. And obviously, I'd be remiss if I was saying it's, I have the answer to make sure that your kids don't misuse drugs, drinking, sex, and stuff like that. But the truth is, that everything that I have ever read or heard that shows that parents can have a significant effect on their children's risk behavior. But the secret, it turns out, is that you have to talk to them. What should you say? Whatever you want. But to talk to them about sex, drugs, drinking, what your concerns are, what is okay with you, what is not. The only thing that I would say, and I'll make a quick comment, which is that I, as a psychologist, am not a specific drug and alcohol counselor, but a lot of kids who I see do have drug and alcohol problems. One thing that I think I have gotten better at over the years is talking to kids about drugs and drinking. And the bottom line is that I'm very honest. And honest doesn't mean that you're supposed to tell your kids, well, is it true that you were high, like Uncle Phil says, through all of high school? I'm a believer in tell them what you feel is useful. If not, it's none of their business. Honest more means to talk about what you actually believe or not to be risked with drugs, drinking, sex. Not so much bringing in total scare things, because the problem with that is that kids will say, well, I know lots of kids, or the famous thing that they'll say, well, I won't tell my parents, but yes, I do some of that, but I'm not a real problem like that Stevie Henderson. He has a serious problem. But the point being that what you want to do is talk to them, you want to be as honest as you can, and you want to talk to them as much as you can. The only other problem is, and you have to realize, that they're not always going to be the best audience. They don't usually say, gosh, Dan, thank you for sharing your ideas about marijuana. You know what? Me, PJ, and Brian were talking about this stuff at lunch yesterday, and some of the stuff you're saying is really different. I'm wondering if we can get a little dialogue on with the points. Doesn't work that way. Usually what they say is, this the drug lecture again. But my only point, and this important point, is that when you do all this talking, if you actually do it, all this stuff goes in their head. All of it goes in their head. They are influenced by it. And everything that I know of says that the one thing that parents can do that has a significant effect on kids' risk behavior is actually talking. Rules with teenagers. How do you know what the right rules are? What's the right time for a particular 14-year-old girl to go out on a Friday night? Answer, who knows? How do you decide? You talk to other people if you can. But a lot of decisions with teenagers, you sort of have to make on the spot. You don't know exactly what are the exact right guidelines. And the problem is, the major problem with having teenagers is that we want them to be happy. We want them to have a social life. We want them not to stand out as differently from other kids. So we are also pulled in ways that maybe we're not completely comfortable with. The rule about rules with teenagers is that if the basis of your rules, if the basis of your authority with your teenager is that you are right, they will run you into the ground. What's this? This is a list of all the kids in my class and their phone numbers. I want you to call their parents, and you will see that I have the earliest purview of anybody in my class. The point is, and my only point with this is, that what you really need to go with is what you're comfortable with. And that the bottom line is not that, no, this is the right thing when I'm saying these unpopular decisions. The bottom line is, this is what I've decided, and you're stuck with me as your parent. Kids hate that, but that really is the bottom line, and it's the one that actually works. If you're constantly, as they will put you in the position of defending yourself, and you keep on trying to come up with answers, you will never come up with answers. So the bottom line has to be, I don't know if this is right or if this is wrong, but this is what I have decided. And in effect, we're saying, if it turns out that because of my rules, I ruin your social life in high school, and later on you have a serious psychiatric depression as a direct result of this, I apologize. But I mean, that's the kind of thing we're afraid of. The bottom line has to be, and that's the part that takes a lot of nerve on our part, which is, this is what I've decided, and I'm going to take the responsibility for it in the discussion. Anyway, what do you do if they break rules? Answer. Confront them every time and keep the rules in place. You can, if you want, add consequences, although, as I'll talk about shortly, you don't want to come up with huge, major punishment-type things. But the truth is that all you have to do is confront them every time and keep the rules in place, because the fact is that the vast majority of teenagers are held by their parents' rules. Imperfectly. Teenagers obey, sort of. Teenagers obey most of the time. The most serious mistake that parents can make with a teenager is in trying to get total obedience, because you won't get it. And instead, what happens is this thing of escalating punishments, which end up with parent and teenager, in effect, in enemy camps during the kid's teenage years, which really is too bad, not just because it's a loss for the parents, it's unpleasant, but it really is unfortunate for the kid because they don't get the support from the parents. Which is to say that what you want to do, as I said, is confront them every time, keep the rules in place. How do you know if your kids are controlled by your rules? Answer, they argue. There is a small but definite minority of teenage kids, who are a whole other story, who are out of control. They do not argue. Beverly, I want you in at 11:30. Beverly just shrugs and walks out of the room and does what she's going to do. The vast majority of teenagers are controlled by your rules. They argue, and they sneak and they lie. Trust with teenagers. One hears that it is really important for parents to trust their teenage child. We had teenagers here, we interviewed. It's important for their parents to trust them. They would all say, yes, it's really important. It's growing my self-esteem. I'm growing self-esteem. My parents trust me. Then we say that you sneak and lie a lot. And they would say, that's not the point. But it is the point. Fact is that the vast majority of teenagers do sneak and lie. And they sneak and lie not because they are bad people. They grow up to be wonderful, nice people. They sneak and lie because there is a basic gap, unbridgeable gap, between parents and teenagers. And that gap is as follows. We want them to be safe. They want to have a good time. And these two are not bridgeable, because if they're, okay, you want me to be honest? All right. The party that I'm going to this Saturday night, well, if it's anything like the party I went to last week, yeah, I am going to drink. I probably smoke a little marijuana, and then I probably have sex with some senior, I don't know. Oh my God, you're not going to, I was just kidding. No, that's not at all. No. We were bobbing for apples. Oh, really? That sounds nice. But in point of fact, and I do say this seriously, that if you as a parent of a teenager put too much stock in, it's really, really important that you can trust them. What I'm a believer in is that you should trust them for what you learn that you can trust them for, and for the rest, you just try to stay a step ahead of them as best as you can. And I say that quite seriously, because if you rely too much on trust, one, you often can be overly naive. Famous thing that you know, statistic on and on and on is the enormous gap between what parents think that their children are doing and what their children actually do. So it's just a point of being, you don't want to, yeah, my kid may well be doing stuff, regardless of what they are saying. If you take it personally, you know, like, oh, you know what happened? We caught her in a complete lie, and then you know what she did? She just kept on lying. I can't believe she would do that to me. If you do that, that's really too bad, because more realistic is to understand the nature of what you have, and again, not to be too naive. The good news is, as I said, that adolescence ends. And with the big majority of them, they really do come out okay. And what happens is, and this really does happen, that by the end of adolescence, they start becoming critical of you for not having been strict enough with them when they were younger. They'll quote a lot of things you used to say. And a famous thing is older teenage siblings in regard to younger teenage siblings. The older ones are merciless with parents about how they're not strict enough. You don't know what's out there. I do. And they really will say to you, do you remember that party at Beverly's when I was 14? Well, you should not have let me go. There were boys, there was drinking, and Beverly's parents were not there. Well, excuse me, don't you remember you had Beverly disguise her voice as her mother? Well, you should not have believed her. Yeah. At any rate, my point, and I will stop and open for questions or comments, is that, again, if rather than looking at any particular moment of your teenage child or your interaction with your teenage child as an indicator that all is lost, much better is, much more reliable, is to look at yourself overall and say, have I been basically a good nurturing parent? And have I been willing over the teenage years, at least sometimes, to take unpopular stands, but have been willing to stand up to my kid and put up with a fair amount of flack? If the answer to both those questions is yes, then the odds really are in your favor that your kid is going to come out fine. And it really does work that way. And I thank you all for coming.
I'm just say one thing that he said to back him up. My 4 sons are all grown, and my oldest one has 3 sons. I have 3 grandsons. I won't tell you their age because I don't want you to know how old I am. But my oldest one says to me, I can't believe it, Mom. I swore I'd never do it. I opened my mouth, and yours and Dad's words are coming out. So it's true. They are listening to what you say. Before I let Dr. Wolf go outside, I really do want to say who's involved with SCOPE, because we're very proud of our organization. It is Linda Dombrowski, who's the director of Cherry Hill Drug and Alliance. It is also Mona Noyes, who is the coordinator of Cherry Hill Project Character Education Initiative. It's Randy Miller, who's the nurse manager of Kennedy Behavioral Health System. It's Gail Sardone, who is our representative from Cherry Hill's own PTA, the umbrella organizations for all 19 PTAs. It's Jen DeStefano, who's the substance abuse coordinator for Cherry Hill Schools and for Project Kids, and I'm Kathy Howard, the founder of that. So we're very happy we could bring you these types of evenings. And please, I want to thank again Tony Wolf. I think he's incredible. And thank you for coming.